Okay, so have you ever wondered, like, okay, so have you ever wondered, like, do religions have an expiration date?
Oh, that's a big one right out the gate.
Right. It's a question that's fascinated people for, well, forever, probably. And today, we're looking at it through the lens of Islam. We found this article, it's on gav.com, called The Lifespan of Islam on Earth.
Okay, yeah, I see why this one caught your eye.
I mean, talk about a headline, right?
Sure, for sure. And this idea, this concept, it's not unique to just Islam. A lot of cultures, a lot of faiths, they have this idea of a, divinely ordained timeline, a beginning, an end, that whole thing.
Right, like a predetermined path.
Exactly. And this article, it's trying to explore that. But, it's key to remember, we're in the realm of interpretations here.
Not like set in stone facts.
Right, exactly.
And the article comes right out. It suggests Islam might have a 1,500-year lifespan. Just like, boom, 1,500 years. That's it.
It's a bold claim, and they try to support it by using a hadith.
Okay, so before we go any further, got to ask, for those who might not be familiar, hadith, what are we talking about here?
Totally. So hadith, it's basically like a collection, right? Sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, practices, his life, all carefully documented, super important in Islam.
So kind of like a guidebook, but based on like living tradition.
Exactly. Offers insight into, Islamic principles, practices, the whole thing.
Gotcha. So the article's using these hadith to build a timeline? Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, they're trying to connect specific ahadith, ones found in major Islamic texts like Sahih Bukhari, Sunan Abu Dawud, to sort of create a framework.
And this framework is pointing to that 1,500-year mark. It feels, I don't know, kind of intense when you put it like that.
Right, and it's not a belief that everyone within Islam, universally accepts. It's more common in certain schools of thought.
Okay, so there's like debate even within the faith about it?
Yeah.
Interesting. But the article, they get even more specific, right? They start throwing out actual years. We're talking 1437 AH, 1500 AH, even going as far as 1536 AH. It's like a countdown almost.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where understanding the Islamic calendar is really, really key.
Oh, right. Because they have their own calendar system, don't they?
Yeah, so those dates you mentioned with the AH after them, that stands for after Hijrah.
Okay, hold on. Break that down for me. Hijrah. Rings a bell.
Right. So the Hijrah refers to the Prophet Muhammad's migration from Mecca to Medina, huge moment in Islamic history. And that year, that's like their starting point, their year one, if you will.
So is how they measure time since that pivotal event.
Exactly. And it's a lunar calendar, so it's about 11 days shorter than the Gregorian calendar, which is what we mostly use today.
So to really understand those years the article throws out, we can't just do a one-to-one conversion in our heads.
It takes a bit more calculation, yeah. But the point is, they're using these AH dates to try and map out what they see as Islam's potential future.
And this is where it gets even more wild, because then the article brings up the return of Isa Jesus and the role of Imam Mahdi. Big topics.
Definitely. We're talking figures wrapped up in, centuries of theological thought.
So like Cliff Notes versions for those who are just dipping their toes into this.
Okay, so Isa, Jesus, he's hugely important in Islamic tradition. He's a prophet of God, and his return, it's associated with the end times.
Okay, so far so good. And Imam Mahdi.
Imam Mahdi, he's believed to be a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, and he has this, kind of messianic role in Islamic eschatology.
Okay, so we've got these major figures, right? Isa returning, Imam Mahdi, end time stuff. But then the article mentions something else. After Isa comes back, there's this period, 7 years, where religion is just gone.
Yeah, it's a pretty striking image. 7 years with no religion on earth really makes you think, what would that even look like?
Seriously, how do you even wrap your head around that concept?
It's definitely a lot to unpack. And it gets at this idea that in Islamic end time beliefs, things get really, really intense before that final judgment. It's a time of huge upheaval spiritually, faith is tested, the world completely transforms.
So there's no religion, period. It's like a symptom of that larger transformation.
You could see it that way, yeah. Though it makes you wonder, are we talking literal? Like, poof, all religion just vanishes from people's minds.
Or is it more like symbolic? Maybe the institutions are gone, the structures, but that human need for something bigger that's still there.
Right. It's like, does religion as a concept only exist within those structures? Fascinating question. And it's interesting, thinking about how other traditions view this end times period.
Oh, totally. In some forms of Christianity, you've got the rapture, right? All the believers suddenly whisk away to heaven. This 7-year period, it's almost the opposite.
Right.
Religion getting wiped off the map.
It's a really interesting comparison, and it highlights how even though different faiths have their own specific beliefs, they often grapple with these same big questions. Death, rebirth, the fate of humanity, it's a common thread.
It's that shared human experience, right? Trying to make sense of the unknown, even when it's something as huge as the end of the world.
Exactly. We're all trying to find meaning, purpose.
Absolutely. Speaking of trying to piece things together, there was this other part in the article that kind of threw me. It talked about something called the Fatwa on the Millennium and connected it to the year 1000 AH.
Oh yeah, the Fatwa on the Millennium. It seems a little out of left field, but it actually ties in with how people within Islam have thought about the end times over the centuries. Okay, so first, we got to know what a fatwa even is.
Right, because I'm sure not everyone listening is a scholar on that.
Basically, it's like an Islamic legal expert gives their opinion, their ruling on a specific issue. A religious decree, sort of, though how much weight it carries, that depends on who gave it, the context, that whole thing.
Got it. So this fatwa on the millennium, it was like some medieval Islamic scholar weighing in on, what, the apocalypse?
Pretty much. See, around the year 1000 AH, there was this big wave of anxiety. People thinking, okay, the first millennium of Islam is ending. What does it mean?
A very Y2K kind of moment.
Totally. Some thought maybe the Prophet Muhammad would be resurrected, Judgment Day right around the corner, you know, that whole thing. And it seems like this fatwa was trying to address those anxieties.
Okay, so trying to calm everyone down or at least offer some perspective.
Exactly. And that idea of a millennium being this super significant, potentially scary time, it pops up in a lot of cultures. But I'm sensing another but coming.
But how does this 1000 AH fatwa connect to everything else in the GHB.com article? The one we're looking at focused on 1500 AH. The article mentions it, but it never really makes that connection clear.
And that, my friend, is one of the most intriguing things about this whole article. It throws out these different threads, the 1500-year claims, specific dates, this old fatwa, but it doesn't always connect them explicitly. It's like it wants us to figure out those links for ourselves.
It's like they're giving us pieces of a puzzle,
right?
But they left a bunch of the pieces blank, you know? Like, here, you try and figure this out.
Yeah, and that's where the real work begins, right? Thinking critically, digging deeper into Islamic tradition, prophecies, what it all means. It's not about being told what to believe. It's about engaging with these ideas.
It's about asking questions. Which, let's be real, these topics bring up some big questions.
Huge. This isn't just some abstract theology seminar. We're talking about the unknown, what comes next, death. It gets pretty real pretty fast.
No kidding. Whether you come at this from a place of faith, skepticism, or, somewhere in between, it makes you think about your own life.
Exactly. Your place in the grand scheme of things. And this deep dive, focusing on Islamic prophecies, it gives us this whole other perspective to consider.
I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. We talked about specific ahadith. We touched on Isa returning, the role of Imam Mahdi. Pretty heavy stuff.
Right. And then that curveball of a future with no religion, plus that whole fatwa on the millennium thing, how people way back then were trying to make sense of it all.
It's a lot to process. So, as we wrap up, what's the key takeaway? If someone's been listening to all this, what do we want them to walk away thinking about?
I'd say, don't be afraid to explore. Approach these topics, prophecies, the end times, all of it with a sense of curiosity. Don't shy away from the big questions. Ask them.
And don't just take one source as gospel, right?
Exactly. Look for different perspectives, compare, contrast. There's a whole world of knowledge out there waiting to be discovered.
We've just scratched the surface here, really.
It's just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. So, listeners, consider this your jumping off point. We've given you the spark. Now go out there and ignite your own curiosity. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.